friends, Ginny D here, and those of you who follow me on Twitter may know that I started DMing my first D&D campaign in July of last year. I've only been playing D&D for a little over a year, and DMing is so much more challenging than being a player. Thankfully, I've had excellent role models and mentors, and tons of great resources, and the absolute most forgiving and appreciative party ever. Just to get the most commonly asked questions out of the way first, we are using 5th edition, it's a homebrew, and no, I don't want to stream it, but I do want to talk about it. So today I wanted to specifically talk about my experience DMing for the first time and just the things I've learned. This video is brought to you by Nerdarchy's Out of the Box Encounters book. This book features 55 unique encounters for 5th edition D&D, plus monsters, magic items, maps, and even flat plastic miniatures for each encounter. The book has already been funded on Kickstarter, but it's not too late to snag your own copy using their late pledge manager, which I will link in the description. Also, one of the Kickstarter stretch goals that they achieved was Nerdarchy the Convention, a first-year tabletop gaming convention being held near Philadelphia over Halloween weekend 2020, where I will be appearing alongside a bunch of other exciting special guests. The con will feature public games, panels and workshops, and even a Halloween party on site. You can buy badges through the Kickstarter pledge manager as add-ons, and you don't need to buy the book in order to get them, although you probably should because it sounds awesome. First of all, I'm sure some of the things I'm about to say are going to sound really obvious to people with a lot of D&D experience. So I just want to remind you, this isn't me offering expert advice or me trying to act like I have discovered some groundbreaking new concept. I'm just talking about my experiences. If it helps somebody, great. If it amuses somebody, great. If it generates good, mildly interesting background noise while you fold your laundry, great. I've decided to organize this into an ordered list because that is what the internet likes. So here are 7 lessons I've learned since starting to DM my first campaign. I've learned that looser prep is better prep. Probably the most common DMing advice that I see is reminding DMs that players will always ruin your plans, but I don't necessarily think that's true. In my experience, if you create rigid plans, then yes, your players will likely stomp on them, or they'll feel trapped into doing whatever you wanted. Despite all of the reading I did and how fully aware I was that railroading is shitty and unpleasant for players, I still made this mistake a few times during the first few sessions. It can be really hard not to, especially if you have one plan and your players look like they're about to skirt it and force you to pull an entire session out of your ass. But if you create plans that are flexible, you can adjust them on the fly to suit whatever your players decide to do. My plans these days are full of ifs. Often I go into a session with 4 or 5 loosely laid out options for what could happen, and each of those options has a ton of variables. Maybe the players will notice the old, boarded up well and decide to investigate it, or maybe the reskinned aboleth that lives down there will climb out of the well and attack them while they're sleeping. Or maybe they'll leave this whole area entirely and the same creature will end up living in a nearby cave with an underground lake or something. No matter what happens, I'm prepared, and my players don't have to feel like I was forcing them to climb into some well just because that's where I had an encounter planned. Learning this has led me to do a very loose, general sort of session prep. Initially, my prep documents were pages long, sometimes with pre-written descriptions, but these days they're mostly just a series of questions and then a few notes on the answers. Who's holding that cursed object that they don't know is cursed yet? And is it maybe time for them to start having mysterious nightmares? How long has it been since the rogue sent that letter, and is it time for him to receive a response? Whether or not that nightmare or that letter feels like the right thing to toss in all depends on how the session goes, but having these options available to pick from allows me to pepper in interesting plot and character building moments when they feel right. I've learned that not every session needs combat. This is a lesson that I think Critical Role models really well. Sometimes multiple sessions go by where they don't fight anything. But while running my own game, I realized that with players who are new to role-playing, it can be difficult to force the kind of interesting character moments that often make up the meat of the more combat-light episodes of shows like Critical Role. These are shows where the cast is much more experienced with the storytelling of D&D. I had to learn the lesson that while I don't always need to provide combat, I do need to provide something. If the players decide on their own to go swimming in a lake and get drunk off of beer from the alchemy jug and play Truth or Dare for an entire session, then great. But you can't force character moments like that. So if I want to run a session without combat, I need to provide them with other options for what to do. Maybe that's a puzzle to solve, maybe that's NPCs to interact with, maybe that's some other kind of skill challenge. Hitting things until they're dead has its place, and it is undeniably a fun part of D&D gameplay, but the kind of game I want to run isn't just about that. It's also about a story, and it's my job as the DM to lead my players through that story and give them the opportunities that they need to develop their characters and explore more than just dealing damage. I've learned that it's way better to overwhelm players than to bore them. I quickly figured out that making a combat encounter or a puzzle easier to solve is way more doable than making it harder. I actually think about it kind of like an escape room. If you've ever done one, you know that the best experiences are the ones where you're watching the clock tick down as your team frantically tries to solve the last few puzzles. It is so much more satisfying to win with 2 minutes left on the clock than it is to win with 20. But not everyone has the same experience and ability, so an escape room designer's job is to create a room that will challenge the most capable participants, and then it's the escape room staff's job to provide clues if the players are struggling. That way, everyone gets a good experience. The room isn't too easy for anyone, but at the same time, they also have the ability to make it easier if they need to. By the same token, if a monster is really thrashing your party, you have so many options on how to handle it. Maybe the monster knocks out your party and brings them back to its lair to feed their young later. Suddenly it's an escape story. Maybe a new NPC arrives to help them fight the monster and then introduce a quest to your players. Or maybe this is a session where your players learn that not every fight can be won and they should save themselves now so that they can revisit the problem when they're stronger. You have plenty of safeguards in place to prevent an accidental TPK, so throw your players something challenging and they'll feel so much more accomplished if they defeat it. I've learned that I don't have to always lead. Sometimes I can and should follow. I know it's nothing new for DMs to steal ideas from their players. Sometimes their guess at the deeper meaning of something that they encounter is way better than whatever you had planned. But more than just player theories, I've learned that it's really helpful to take cues from how your players respond to things and what paths they choose to take. Recently, I introduced a random encounter that was mostly just meant to fill space on a long journey and eventually lead them to an NPC. They came across a wild animal's corpse that was infested with a fungus with some cool spreading mechanics. I had no long-term plans for the source of this fungus or its larger impact on the world. I wasn't thinking about the fungus at all, but my players became immediately concerned that this was part of a larger issue. They reasoned that this invasive species could really wreak havoc on the forest if it was unchecked, and if it was a new problem, then where did it come from? Who brought it here? Instead of ignoring their response, I came up with an answer for where the fungus came from, and something that they could do to correct it. Even though I hadn't originally intended on this being a larger plotline, I am laying out the kind of story that requires my players to think bigger and to strategize and to draw connections, so I wanted to encourage and reward that kind of gameplay. I've learned that it is okay to admit to mistakes. I am new to this, so I make a lot of mistakes, but even experienced DMs make mistakes. I mean, we're playing a game that literally requires textbooks. There's a lot of room for human error. As the DM, your players look to you for answers, and while people have advised me right and left to make things up when I don't know the answer, sometimes doing that can actually break gameplay in some pretty big ways. For example, I didn't fully understand the mechanics around identifying magic items, and what I told players in an early session actually made the spell Identify pretty much useless. A player pointed that out to me because he wanted to understand whether or not it was useful to take that spell. I admit that my initial response was to get defensive because I already felt insecure and inexperienced as a DM, and I really desperately wanted to be good at my job. But then I realized that being a good DM isn't about having the handbook memorized, it's about providing a good gameplay experience. And in this case, that meant me admitting to my mistake and correcting it. I've learned that players don't have to roll for everything. This has been a big one for me. At first, I was asking players to roll for anything that they chose to do. Talk to a person, roll charisma. Ford a stream, roll athletics. Find a place to camp, roll survival. This often put me in the position of making the entire party roll for things, and it also stopped my players from doing some really basic things because they rolled badly. Then I saw some really good and seemingly really obvious advice, which is, unless there are consequences for failure, don't make your players roll. Maybe sometimes it would be fun to derail a session by having one of the party members get swept away when they roll poorly to cross a river, but unless I am prepared to do that, I shouldn't give the players the option to fail. It's like the D&D equivalent of don't make threats unless you're prepared to back them up. finally, I've learned that having the right group is everything. Especially as a new DM, I'm still learning what kind of game I want to play and how to provide that kind of game to my players. I mess up sometimes, I have sessions that are rocky, I mishandle some situations. But that's okay, because my players understand. They're my friends, they forgive my mistakes and celebrate my successes and help me out when I need them to. DMing can be really vulnerable and intimidating, so pick a group of people that you trust, people you're comfortable around, people who won't make you feel self-conscious or inadequate. In the end, we're all working together to tell a story and play a game as a group. Everybody contributes different things. A great game requires the right DM and the right players, and I am very lucky to have the right players. After just 7 months DMing, I am still hammering out the basics on how to run a fun, engaging game. I still run into things I don't know every single session, and I am still voraciously consuming even the most basic DMing advice and taking copious notes. I'm sure in a few years, the most important lessons I've learned will have changed a lot, but for now, I'm just happy to be telling a story with my friends and getting better every time. DMs, what lessons have you learned that you think are the most important? Also, don't forget to check out Nerdarchy's Out of the Box Encounters book and get your tickets for Nerdarchy the Convention. That link is in the description.